Welcome to the party. I'm Sam Ekstrom of Locked On Sports Minnesota. This podcast has now outlasted the Nathaniel Hackett tenure in Denver. Success!
I'm Tom Schreier, and on the last show I was on, producer Matt DeBritz criticizing Arif and my backgrounds, our Zoom backgrounds. When you have facts, you don't need frills.
I'm Alec Lewis. I'm not as clever as these other two. The Hackett one was phenomenal, but the last time I was on, I think the Vikings had not won enough games to really feel like they were a good team, and here they are, and they're 12-3, and we'll have some observations.
Arif Hasan, I really like this method of evaluating how long a podcast lasts. I kind of want to know how many Scaramucci's, how many Liz Trusses, how many heads of lettuce this podcast has lasted. If any listeners know, please let us know in the comments.
That's the crew today. It's the Minnesota football party. Endless Vikings talk for the next hour.
Locked On Sports Minnesota podcast. It's endless Minnesota Vikings talk with the diverse voices of your local experts. It's time for the Minnesota football party. It's your guys hanging out talking next level Vikings football. So join in with Pro Football Network's Arif Hasan, Locked On Vikings Luke Braun, Superior Sports Talk's Luke Inman, and Vikings insider Sam Ekstrom, plus the biggest names in Minnesota football for the Minnesota football party. And it starts now.
Welcome into the Minnesota football party today, everyone. We are Luke-less. No Braun, no Inman. Tom Schreier of Zone Coverage and Alec Lewis of The Athletic fill in. And Arif Hasan, the regular from Pro Football Network, joins us as well. Jam-packed show. We still have to react to Vikings-Giants. It feels like an eternity ago, 3 days ago, with Christmas in between. We'll talk about that and turn our eye towards the Packers. Can the Vikings end the Packers' playoff hopes on Sunday? We'll, of course, get into that. We've got nerdy stats of the day. And are there any narratives that you would like to debunk about the 2022 Minnesota Vikings? We'll give everybody that opportunity as well. Before we hit this discussion, let me remind people that Amazon Fire and Roku are terrific ways to consume our show. If you got a new TV for Christmas, you can fire us up on your smart TV, Amazon Fire or Roku, or the YouTube app. Find us on Locked On Sports Minnesota, where you can get all of our shows on video, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Well, Tom and Alec, I'll give you guys sort of the first crack at this. Vikings-Giants on Saturday. It ends in a team record 61-yard field goal by Greg Joseph, and the Vikings are 12-3. Tom, I'll let you go first. Major takeaway from Vikings-Giants. What do you got?
I don't know. I should have at some point thought the Vikings were going to lose, but I didn't. I know that the Giants came back, tied at 24-24. The defense still looked bad. I still don't know if I fully trust Greg Joseph, but in the moment, they've convinced everyone. As long as it's close, they're going to win.
Alec.
Yeah, I think my major takeaway is about Greg Joseph. I mean, look, it's not the sexiest thing to talk about kickers in this league on podcasts like these, but I mean, I think in the early half of this season, there were a lot of questions about Greg Joseph. He missed, I believe, 5 extra points. He missed multiple field goals, 50 yards plus. He has been really good of late, and that was kind of the cherry on top, that 61-yarder to what he's done. And again, it's not the sexiest thing to talk about, but as this thing drifts towards the playoffs and this Vikings team needs as much juice as possible to beat teams in the NFC, they're going to need a reliable kicker. And so I just think the fact that you have this guy who might be able to build off a big confidence boost like that, I think is something that is really positive, both for him, for this Vikings team, and a fan base that has been tormented by this position for way too long.
Actually, it's very sexy to talk about kickers on a podcast like this, Alex.
Oh, yeah.
Sell yourself short. Yeah.
Arif, you've been around the market for long enough now that I think you know that kickers sell. I think my takeaway is actually kind of the opposite of Tom's. It doesn't actually disagree with his, but I think it's that the Vikings are now a blitzing team. They played a lot more man coverage than they ever have all year. They blitzed a lot more, and it was a lot more effective. In fact, over the last 2 weeks, wait, that's a nerdy stat of the day. I'm going to say that one.
I've got an appetizer for nerdy stat of the day as well. The Vikings in their last 8 home games, so we're conveniently throwing out Green Bay, so it doesn't really count, but in their last 8 home games, the Vikings have a 7-1 record and an even point differential. Isn't that the story of their season?
Oh, 100%. Who they are.
Yeah, and I do wonder if that Cowboys loss had been just like a 24-21 loss, how differently we would view this team. But digressing, Vikings Giants, I walk away like with an increasing amount of respect for the amount of times Kirk Cousins gets hit and keeps getting back up. Seemingly, like the only thing that happens when he gets hit is he turns to the official and says, "Hey, you see that? You see that? Low hit, throw the flag. Yep, see that? Helmet to helmet, throw the flag." As he's getting hit in bone-crushing fashion, he's petitioning for penalty yardage.
Throwing the flag as he's falling to the ground.
It's unbelievable.
I mean, all the greats do it. Mahomes does it. Brady does it. And now we can add Cousins to that esteemed list.
He really is wearing some crazy armor. And he's got the second most pressures against him in the NFL. Pressure rate is higher than last year's, like 37%, one of the 10 highest in the league. He's taking an enormous amount of hits. He's facing blitzes in key third downs, and he's throwing dimes. And he mixes that in with some really head-scratching throws, like throughout the game, where he misses open receivers. He throws too high. He throws interceptable screen passes. And yet, when the rubber meets the road, he's doing all the right things. How did you guys feel walking away from that game about the first round matchup? Would you want, if you're a Vikings fan, would you want the Giants again, or would you rather go in a different direction? Back around the circle, Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to think like Washington, because I was like, at least that game was there, played on crabgrass. Like, what if it was played on actual, a real playing surface, in Minneapolis? Something Washington qualifies. I don't know. It's probably still their best option. I can't imagine that's the best the Vikings can play them. Having said that, the first round matchup is going to be interesting because the Vikings really don't put anyone away.
Yeah, they sneak by the Giants at home. They sneak by Washington on the road. Alec, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think the Giants would be the optimal matchup. I do, because I don't believe their receiving core is going to test your secondary to a crazy level. And then I also think their secondary is going to leave some stuff to be desired on the offensive end for a receiving core that the Vikings that has shown consistently to be pretty dangerous when they need them most. So I think the Giants, even with their exotic blitzing of Wink Martindale, they don't scare me as much as that Washington front. And then the Lions offense and what Ben Johnson's done is pretty scary. And then the Green Bay Packers and Aaron Rodgers are who they are. So the Giants would, if I was picking, that's probably the way I'd go.
Arif, does Carson Wentz on the Commanders influence how you view them? I know you're a big Carson Wentz guy.
I'm a big react to Carson Wentz guy. That is accurate. I think just even having Carson Wentz on the team is bad mojo. I don't know. The Eagles were able to overcome it.
Being the Commanders is bad mojo already.
Oh yeah, no, they're piling it on top, right? I mean, okay. As an aside, I know this is not the topic of the podcast, but that they're getting sued by the former Hogs, right? Like the offensive line and running back that composed, that famed, Washington offensive line. They're getting sued for doing brand damage to the Hogs identity, which they have now formed a company to hold the likeness of so that they can sue Dan Snyder. Incredible stuff. Really good evidence of just terrible mojo, right? I think that, going up against so the Vikings obviously as a playoff team just have tremendously poor luck, right? I think one way to overcome that is to be against a team so karmically poisoned as Washington. And just adding Carson Wentz to that mix is just, I think that would really help in that regard.
Sure. I think I would lean Giants. Sure. And here's why. I just don't want to tempt fate with an unbelievable defensive line ruining the day for Kirk Cousins. I don't think the Giants defense is really that strong. I think they're extremely flappable. They were 26th entering that game in yards allowed. their skill players, that was the secret sauce that decided that game. Like the Vikings receivers made unbelievable plays and the Giants dropped key passes and key spots. Like that was an enormous difference in the game. And the one guy that could hurt you, Saquon Barkley, had a fine game and they got no other help. I think Washington, regardless of quarterback, there's enough around them to support them where I could see them like staying in the game longer than the Giants. But like you said, Tom, the Vikings don't put anyone away, so it's hard to be super confident about any particular matchup. And one of those key players for the Vikings was TJ Hawkinson, career day. I love the contrast between the tight end trade last year. This is before your time, Alec, but the Vikings traded for a gentleman by the name of Chris Herndon, thinking that he was going to be the magic behind Tyler Conklin when Irv Smith got hurt. And Chris Herndon's final stat line was 4 receptions for 40 yards and 1 touchdown. I think he might have had more penalty yardage than receiving yardage. But this year, TJ Hawkinson's been unbelievable from the time coming into Minnesota. Arif, can you really understate the impact that TJ Hawkinson has had on this passing game?
It is pretty tremendous in a couple of ways. But before that, one note about Chris Herndon. On the same day, they acquired Ben Ellefson off of waivers, and Ellefson immediately outsnapped Herndon. I don't think there was a single game where Herndon had more snaps than Ellefson, and certainly there were many games where Herndon had no snaps and Ellefson had at least 20. So as much as I hate to give credit to NDSU, there you go, Ben Ellefson. Good job learning the playbook as quickly as you should have. Now, as for TJ Hawkinson, so obviously his yardage capability is important. He was already averaging 56 yards a game with the Lions, which is his highest in yards per game, despite the fact that the Lions were passing the least before the Vikings traded for him. Now, his yardage with the Vikings has been pretty tremendous. I think he actually, just because of this Giants game, exceeded 56 yards a game with the Vikings. Either way, the fact that he can not only produce between the 20s, but is a red zone target. Again, he's a little bit up and down in the red zone as a target, but he is a red zone target. That has its own effect, right? Having that secondary receiver is important, but really what's important is how it enables Justin Jefferson and what they do with play design with TJ Hawkinson in there. Now, with Hockenson, they're running a lot more intermediate routes that pushes Jefferson further up the field. His average yards per target air yards on targets has increased 3 to 5 yards as a result of Hockenson being in the game, and it has resulted in more deep throws for Jefferson. We know Jefferson can win at every level of the field. He's effective at every level of the field, but deep throws are more valuable. So having him be equally effective deep versus equally effective intermediate, you'd rather have him just go deep and still have that intermediate threat available to you with somebody like Hockenson who has the ability to pull a safety down.
And he's actually got a career low with the Vikings at 8.5 yards per reception. He's working more the underneaths, opening it up downfield for the other receivers. And it makes sense when you consider that he was like the guy in Detroit last year and other years. He was like either the 1 or 2 option for the Lions. And now he can really thrive, I think, in sort of a pass catcher 3 type of role. He's like sneaky. He's obviously not the MVP of this team, Alec. But, I mean, you would almost put him in, like, the offensive top 3 for the impact that he's had since arriving here, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. Christian Darrisaw's up there as well. I think his impact this year. Brian O'Neill has kind of gone unsung, too, just in terms of his consistency. But there's no question. You're exactly right, and Arif is spot on. Just Hawkinson's presence kind of just shifts the gravity of where certain people can be on the field. I also was thinking about a conversation after the game with Patrick Peterson, and he was asked about TJ Hawkinson. He's like, he can run so many types of routes. He can run corner routes. He can run over routes. He can lose a safety or lose a linebacker in a way that most tight ends, maybe the Chris Herndons of the world, would not be able to. And so, I think TJ Hawkinson and his ability, it's pretty interesting. And I know I don't want to get too far down the road here, but I do think it'll be fascinating if the Vikings get Irv Smith back. Not that Irv's going to supplant TJ Hawkinson, obviously, in the passing game, but I am fascinated to know what they could possibly do with both of those guys on the field in terms of the matchups they could create. It's just something that's in the back of my mind. Irv has seemed to be progressing week by week. I don't mean to shift the conversation there, but I just still think when you talk about the cap of this offense and what's possible, that's another level at which an area which this Kevin O'Connell, this staff can tap into.
Tom, TJ Hawkinson, thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, I still think it's incredible that Detroit traded him within the division. I guess the only complaint is there's been like 2 third down drops, right? Or something like that. But going to Alec's point, when we asked Patrick Peterson about Hockenson, he initially called him a receiver and he corrected himself, right? And I think that's like, it's almost like in the back of their mind, he is functionally part of like, the receiver group there, and has had to be because Thielen looks like he's slowed down a little bit, whether that's age or a lingering knee issue. I really like KJ Osborne. Obviously, he had a breakout game against Indianapolis, but he's basically been used to open up things for Justin Jefferson. So it's not just like, here's another piece, right, to the puzzle. He's become an integral part. I think an interesting thing is, I think Brian O'Neill said he's run some routes in games before he practiced them because obviously he came over in the middle of the season. Given the nuances of route running and how people talk about like even training camp stuff matters throughout the season, he's just that good. It's incredible what he's doing. And I think sometimes we take it for granted because Justin Jefferson's the star and because Hockenson came in with so many expectations.
I put this group on the spot about Justin Jefferson reaching 2,000 yards after I tell you about betonline.net, your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. We track all the NFL lines here on this show, particularly the Vikings, who are 3.5-point underdogs in Green Bay. You can get that line and plenty more at betonline.net. You can also get bowl season lines. Let's see how the Gophers are stacked up against Syracuse. 9.5-point favorites in the Pinstripe Bowl. Thursday at 1 o'clock, over under 41.5 in New York City. Get all those lines, all the sports. You can also get sports podcasts at BetOnline as well. It's where the game starts. Okay, Justin Jefferson entered the final 4 games of the season needing to average 125 to get 2,000. 2 games into that stretch, he's doing it. He's just a little ahead of that pace. He went 123, 133. So here's what he needs. He needs 122 per game to get 2,000. He needs 104 per game to match the NFL record set by Calvin Johnson. We'll start with you, Alec. Does he reach either of those milestones?
Well, if Joe Barry defends him like he did in week 1, he's going to get it in this game. So I don't expect that to happen. I think the Packers defensive staff will do some different things and probably have some of their better corners matched up with them. But, I mean, I'm not betting against this guy. I've watched him week after week now. Knew before I started covering this team he was a really, really impressive player. But he does it in every way. It's so complete. It's so fascinating. I was thinking last week we were standing next to him in the interview session, and he's not that much taller than me, and he's not like just gigantic, but he on the field, it's like there's like another layer of armor and like ability to stretch that is hard to even describe. So he's so capable of doing it in so many different ways, and I do think going up against this Packers team and the Bears team specifically in the following week, I do think he gets there. I just would never bet against this guy at this point.
Arif, what do you think? Sorry. You're not Arif.
He wishes.
I want to be
wishes.
sometimes.
Yeah. See? No, I think that, what was it, 244 for 2,208 for the record. I think that obviously that's entirely possible. He can hit 240. In fact, he could probably go after, Julio's record, which I believe is an even 300 or something like that for a single game receiving yardage record. But I think that, especially against the Packers, but I think that because that is a little less likely than having to hit it over the course of 2 games, it really kind of depends on the Eagles, right? Because if the Eagles lose and the Vikings win against the Packers, they have something to play for in week 18, which means that they'll play all their starters probably throughout the entirety of the game. Now, if the Eagles win and take the Vikings out of contention for the 1st seed, the Vikings have very little to play for. I don't know kind of what the 3 seed, 2 seed thing looks like, but I'm pretty confident that the Vikings are probably going to wrap that up with a win here. And if they do, if the 2 seed is locked in for them, then there's not very much reason for the Vikings to play for a lot. Maybe they'll start all their starters, right? But there's not very much reason for the Vikings to play for a lot. And you might see Justin Jefferson with 0 to 50 yards in that final game if they want to rest their starters pretty quickly. So it really depends on whether or not the Eagles don't have the ability to pull out the rest of their schedule. They've been struggling just a tiny bit in the second half of the season. So it is possible that, the reason Justin Jefferson doesn't hit 2,000 is because the Vikings have won too many games.
I think you're spot on, Arif, and I'll offer one clarification. The 2 seed is definitely at stake if San Francisco wins on Sunday, because San Francisco owns the tiebreaker.
That's right.
So the Vikings could go into Week 18 with 13 wins and still need to win that game to clinch the 2 seed. And who's going to bet against San Francisco at this point, who's won 8 in a row, and 6 of those 8
Purdy
13 or more?
Purdy Mania.
It's unbelievable what do they even want Garoppolo back if he gets healthy in the playoffs? That's another big talker for San Francisco. I think, Brock Lobster. This is a very big conundrum for Kevin O'Connell. What if Justin Jefferson goes for 150 against Green Bay, and then they have nothing to play for? So you're talking about needing 60 for the NFL record and less, like 100 for the 2,000-yard plateau. It is going to be hard to resist playing Justin Jefferson in that game, especially a year after Justin Jefferson got a little, short shrifted by Mike Zimmer in the last game against the Bears a year ago. I still think it's coaching malpractice if you put him on the field. And if it's a meaningless situation, with the amount of hits that he's taken and the amount of targets it would require to get him that record, I don't think it's smart. I think you've got to have better judgment there. I mean, ultimately, it's about so much more than that for this team. I think that it might be unpopular. I think you got to sit him. Who raise your hand or speak up for those that are listening. Do you think that they should sit Justin Jefferson if it's a meaningless game? Tom?
Let me propose this idea, because I am worried that not only about him getting hurt, but think of how that game went last year where it was sloppy and you talk about bad playing surface and stuff. It just seems like a recipe for disaster. If I'm O'Connell and I know that my relationship with Justin Jefferson is vital to my success as a coach, I said, I'm going to try to get you that yardage within the script. And remember how the script went? I know it was in Minnesota, but in the first game, I'll try to get it within the script. If you don't get it, I got to get you out of there, because you can't get hit and blow out your shoulder or a head hit or twist your ankle in the grass. I think that's what I tell them. You get the script. We're going to try to get you the yardage. Get the F out of there after you got it.
Playing surface, definitely a good point, Tom. That's a bad place to play, especially in January 8th. Alec, your thoughts?
Winter.
Yeah. The cool thing about this actually is Kevin O'Connell and Justin Jefferson have worked in pretty lockstep throughout the course of this entire season. I mean, I think I go back to that Philadelphia game and Detroit after that, and I remember seeing those two guys on the practice field really talking about certain things, route running, releases, leverage. I mean, they have really worked through some stuff this year. And the fact that he's at this point where we can have this conversation, I think is a testament, obviously, to the guy himself, but also to Kevin O'Connell and even Kirk Cousins for, at times, I think, being smart with how he's tried to target Justin Jefferson. So all of that is to say, I think the communication Kevin O'Connell and Justin Jefferson have had all year, I think allows this to be a pretty malleable back and forth. And again, I don't know how they have to be smart, and Justin Jefferson's aware enough to know that it's team over everything. But it's going to be very interesting if he's close and if they don't need to win that game. It's a tough one for sure.
I will say that the parlay of Eagles win, Vikings win, San Francisco loss, that's the only scenario where the game means nothing. And that's a fairly unlikely scenario, right? You need 3 results to go in a certain way. I'm curious how hard they'd push him, even if it means something. Like if the difference in a win or loss is the 2 or 3 seed, how much do you care about that? How terrified, scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like you're going to faint on the field, or 1, you don't care at all. How terrified should you be of losing the 2 seed and possibly going to San Francisco in round 2? Alec, your thoughts?
Yeah, not 1 to 10. I mean, 3, 4. I'm not terrified. This Vikings team, like, what if you're this Vikings team? You really be terrified of anything? You've overcome time and time again in so many different scenarios. So I don't know. It's hard for me to be terrified. I think it'd be such a pivotal thing to have that game be in Minnesota. So it matters a lot for the chances at winning this Super Bowl if that's what the hope is, obviously. But I mean, in the end, you're going to have to beat a good team on the road, I think, regardless, unless, to our conversation earlier, the Eagles kind of fall by the wayside these last couple of weeks. So I don't know. I mean, you can be terrified, but I think it's just it's a give or take. It could happen either way, and things will work out if you win the games you have to.
I think people just flash back, Tom, to the 2019 game where you go there in the divisional round and really didn't have a chance. I mean, that the second half of that game became a laugher. That was a Jimmy Garoppolo-led team, a team that had a phenomenal pass rush and resembled the current team a lot, except the quarterback's now Brock Purdy. But I think I'm probably above a 5. I would not want this team to go on the road and play in a playoff setting against a team that's rattled off at that point like 11 in a row. I'd be fairly terrified. Tom, am I too worried about this?
Here's what we need to know, Sam. Alec Lewis fears nothing except the cold. I think this is, I mean, alarms going off. I think San Francisco can San Francisco could beat them here. I think they could beat them there. I think it's a similar formula. Just given the coaching acumen of Shanahan, given there's some familiarity. Remember, they had joint practices and stuff. Not like they're stealing secrets, but they'll know how to face off against Minnesota, given what pressure can do to Kirk Cousins. And you kind of chop off the offense at its head, right? Instead of trying to guard Justin Jefferson, you just try to take out Kirk before you can throw it to him. So, here's the thing. The Vikings can probably lose other ways, but the only way they've proven that they can lose this year is that teams just stomp them, right? And you feel like the formula to stomp them would be San Francisco brings them into their own place in front of their own fans, gets after Kirk Cousins, and just runs the hell out of the ball against the Donatello defense. So I think people should be terrified. I'm not saying you can't beat San Francisco. I think it's a lot harder if you have to go into their place and do it.
Yeah. Well, Arif's a national writer, so he can tell us, is San Francisco legit?
Yes and no, right? Like, I think that you're probably not going to continue to get this level of play from Brock Purdy. I think that there's probably some solves out there that are on film for him, right? And so you can probably do something to kind of head him off at the pass. Whether or not the Vikings have that ability is, I think, a different question. But I think, there is something to be said about like a team that is so focused and consistent on, yards after the catch. I know that Purdy was able to string together some deep throws over the last couple of weeks, but they are primarily a yards after the catch team. That's kind of like the question, whether or not their offense can kind of make good on what their defense is doing. Their defense has been obviously incredible. Obviously, it's been the engine of their winning streak. But we've seen some holes open up in their game. Talanoa Hufanga was playing like one of the best safeties in the first half of the season. Now he's only a top 10 safety. Again, we're looking for like nitpicks here, but he has not been as consistent, right, as he was in the first half of the season. You can find some holes in that defense. It is, of course, very hard. You have to deal with somebody like Nick Bosa, who doesn't have any holes in this game. But there are ways to deal with San Francisco, and I just think not having an offense is going to be kind of the reason that San Francisco takes a nosedive if they ever do. So yeah, there are some issues. The thing is, home, away, I'm kind of with Tom on this one. It kind of doesn't matter as much, especially as much as it used to. The bigger issue for me is that the Vikings have built up a lot of fan equity, and that's when they hurt you the most, right? There are an infinite number of ways to lose. The Vikings have explored very few of them this season. So I am really concerned, and that actually goes all the way back to the Justin Jefferson conversation. Bench him, man. It would be the most Vikings thing ever to lose him right before the playoffs. Absolutely. I like Tom's idea of an opening script. Don't even do it. Don't even do it. Just like if there's nothing to play for, there's very little to play for, out of here.
Yeah, I think that's the sensible way. But I do like the idea, Tom, of a sit down between the coach and the player to at least get his take. Because if he walks in and makes the decision for you and says, no, coach, we've got bigger things to play for. Well, how great is that? I mean, then everybody's in lockstep. If the coach has to pull back the receiver from playing, then maybe there's some hurt feelings there. So I think you need to have that dialogue and maybe find some kind of compromise. And it also depends how close you are. If you need 200 yards, don't even try it. Don't tempt fate in that way. If you're 50 yards, maybe there's a conversation to be had. Nerdy stat of the day around the corner. But before that, Built Bar. Hopefully you got a box of Built Bars in your stocking because they had some awesome holiday flavors. White chocolate peppermint granola, candy cane brownie puff. Hopefully you have been eating Built Bars like crazy with your family during your holiday celebrations. How good are they? If you discovered Built Bar for the first time, your life has probably been changed. They're the best tasting protein bar ever built, revolutionizing nutrition as we know it with 100% real chocolate, 17-ish grams of protein, shockingly low sugar and calorie count, like 130 calories. Sink your teeth into that and change your life. No joke. You can get Built now. If you want to try it for the first time, get it at a discount. 15% off your order right now. Use the promo code LOCKEDON15 at Built.com. Promo code LOCKEDON15 at Built.com for 15% off. Nerdy stat of the day, the part of the show where we dive into our nerddom and deliver our nerdiest stats. Let's run it.
Analytics fans rejoice.
Woo-hoo-hoo!
It's time to get educated.
Whoa, you're blowing my mind right now.
With the nerdy stat of the day.
Nerdy stat of the day. I'll even kick it off here and give you guys some time to sift through. Arif, you can be the anchor leg because you always bring, obviously, your nerdiness last, and you have the best nerdy stats. So we'll leave you for last. Here's mine, inspired by Ron Johnson, who had a good nugget this morning on the Ron Johnson show with Chuck Foreman, by the way. So of any quarterback in the NFL with 25 or more pass attempts in the fourth quarter or overtime, Kirk Cousins is first, and clarifier, this is on third downs. So third downs, fourth quarter overtime, key downs, the most important downs of the game. Kirk Cousins is first in passer rating in those situations with a 132.2 with 7 touchdowns, 1 pick, and a 76% completion percentage. Fourth quarter, third down, Kirk Cousins comes through. Tommy.
That's amazing. I'll be honest. I forgot to prepare a stat. I'm like Ed Donatello. You can't measure heart. You can't measure. Measure want to. All right. I take after the Donatello theory on stats, but I think to your point, like this is what we were wondering about Kirk Cousins. Could he, in an offense focused coach, and then you think of like O'Connell talking about like the quieted mind and how he'll talk to him, which I love the idea of like Kevin O'Connell's soothing voice telling Cousins to calm down. You got this. You know the pre-snap read. You can just throw it to Justin Jefferson if you panic or whatever. Up until I think you get like 15 seconds before the snap. It's checked out, right? It seems like mission accomplished, at least in terms of kind of maximizing Cousins in a spot where we weren't sure he would come through in the clutch.
Alec, bring the nerdiness.
Thanks, Sam. The number is 1. There is one pair of pass rushers on the same team that rank at the top 15 of pass rushers in terms of pressures this season. That's Danielle Hunter and Za'Darius Smith. They're the only pair of pass rushers on one team who rank in the top 15 in terms of pressures. Za'Darius Smith is second in the NFL in pressures with 78, I believe. Danielle Hunter is, believe, 9th with 62 pressures. Obviously, when Za'Darius Smith was signed, it was written about often. I mean, I remember reading Arif, his analysis on Za'Darius and Danielle, what could be possible. And I think what has happened is a pass rush pairing that this team could have conceived of. I mean, it's exactly what you would have hoped for, and I think it's going to be important that these two guys really bring it for the Vikings to win games in this next month.
Okay, Arif.
Yeah, I think that just building off of that, I think that's like a 90th percentile performance in terms of the range of expectations you had for both Hunter and Smith. Really fantastic stuff. Also, when you say top 15 and you list Hunter as 9th, that makes me think that there's another team with 2 in the top 16, just the way that you cut off that stat.
No, there's no question. The Eagles rank. The Eagles have 2 in the top 16. You probably should have used top 10. There was probably a more mathy, nerdy way
No,
to
top
be able
15 is
to.
more impressive. I think that you're right. It's just that as somebody who consistently constructs misleading stats, I mean, interesting stats. All right, no, okay. So I mentioned that.
Yeah, get to yours. Thanks.
Yeah, I mentioned that the nerdy stat of the day from me would have to do with the Vikings blitz and man coverage rate. So for the first 13 or 14 weeks of the season, the Vikings were 24th in the NFL in blitz rate at 19.2%, and in man coverage, they were 30th in the NFL at 13.5%. That is not a quality statistic. That is just a stylistic statistic. But as the Vikings were not doing very well on defense, you could sense that there would be a need to change. Now, we noticed that the Vikings blitzed a lot more. I think all 4 of us did, blitzed a lot more against the Indianapolis Colts. They even mentioned that in the presser afterwards. They happened to continue that against the New York Giants. So for the last 2 weeks, the Vikings are 4th in the NFL in man coverage rate at 37.2%. Nothing like the Lions or the Dolphins, who were both above 50, but 37.2%, 4th in the NFL over the last 2 weeks, and 9th in the NFL at 31.4% in blitz rate. The defense seems to have changed in character and style. I think that we're seeing the benefits of that. Obviously, they were able to stymie the offensive powerhouse that is the Colts, but they were able to do a little bit more against the Colts. They were able to do a little bit more against the Giants, and maybe they'll just be a little bit more adaptable. I'm not saying they always have to blitz, they always have to engage in man coverage, but they know that this tool is there in their toolbox. They have coverage corners that are pretty used to man coverage. Duke Shelley, I don't really know what his history is. He seems to be all right in man coverage. Patrick Peterson, historically a man coverage cornerback. So that's something that they might want to fall upon. And knowing that you've got players like Eric Hendricks, who's a pretty good blitzer, Jordan Hicks, who's an even better blitzer, Harrison Smith, who's like a premier blitzer, knowing that you've got those players and you haven't blitzed them that much, you might as well. You might as well find a way to use them in ways that maximize them. So that's my nerdy stat of the day.
Good stuff, Arif. Good stuff, all. I've got a couple more big Vikings talkers here, including something in the lines of narratives. I think through 15 games, most people have made up their mind, in kind of generalities like Kirk Cousins, clutch, defense, bad, special teams, rejuvenated. But when you dig into it, sometimes we can kind of decide things early in the season, and then we don't change our opinion as the season goes along. So is there anything through 15 games that you think needs to be debunked about the Minnesota Vikings? Are there narratives that you find to be untrue or maybe have changed over the course of the season? Arif, this feels right up your alley. I'll let you kick us off.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I'm going to have to, double dip, because the first narrative is that the defense doesn't change, right? That the defense is stodgy, that Ed Donatel doesn't know how to adapt to his personnel and stuff like that. We just saw that change. That's really important. The defense obviously has some personnel issues on the back end, but we've seen how this defense can perform better once they change. I think also narratively, it's important to recognize that this isn't just a Justin Jefferson team. I still think he's the team MVP, especially if we kind of separate, how important quarterbacks are in terms of team MVPs. But, it's not just a Justin Jefferson team. And I think that seeing kind of, especially that middle stretch of the season where Jefferson went off, the team was winning games because he was going off. We've now seen players like KJ Osborne step up and have tremendous games. Players like TJ Hawkinson step up and have tremendous games. We know that Adam Thielen has come in, really important late in games. This, I think, has a lot to do with as much as Kirk Cousins' growth as a passer over the course of the year and his familiarity with the system, as it does with Kevin O'Connell's, capacity for using some of these players in more advantageous situations for them. But this is not just a Justin Jefferson team. Now, if he's gone, this team is in a bad spot. But if teams decide that they're going to do what they did at the beginning of the season, double cover Justin Jefferson, they're going to be hurt a lot more than the Eagles and the Lions were when they decided to take away with double or triple teams Justin Jefferson. There are now options that the Vikings are capable and willing to use and have now been proven in usage that'll enable that passing game if you just give players like Osborne, Thielen, and Hockenson that kind of space. And, Dalvin Cook has done pretty well with the ball in his hands as of late, too.
Mm-hmm. Alec, what do you got?
Yeah, I could go a lot of ways with it. I mean, I just talked about Daniil Hunter a little bit. I think that's one of them that early in the season there was a lot
That's
of
a good one.
it seemed like rhetoric around Daniil Hunter struggling. And I mean, I remember talking to Mike Smith, the pass pro specialist, about that. And he's like, look, man, it's like everyone looks at sacks, excuse me, and they make their judgments off that. But Daniil on film looked to be showing up, and he was chipped a ton. He was doubled a ton. So the fact the numbers have started to show up of late, I think that's one of those. I mean, he's been pretty active all year. He's also coming back from that injury that he suffered last year. So I think Daniil's play all season and production is one of those narratives. The other one I think, and I wrote about this too, KJ Osborne, for weeks, I think people were like, oh, we expected this KJ Osborne breakout. It's not happening. Is he not good? And I mean, obviously he went off against Indianapolis, but I think a lot of it is, I mean, when you have a guy like Justin Jefferson who demands the type of targets that he does, and you bring in a guy like TJ Hawkinson who has the kind of gravity that he does, KJ Osborne's just not going to be the number one option in every single pass play you run. I think often he can dictate coverage in a way that helps those other guys, and he was selfless enough to do that. So I think using the numbers that KJ Osborne has posted this season as a way to say, you know, he hasn't broken out, he hasn't taken another step, I just don't think is a fair narrative. So those are the two that I've thought about recently.
Yeah, Osborne at 474 right now per game, 31. So he'll end up with about 550, a little short of last year, but probably more receptions as well than last year. So he's been utilized a similar amount. Tom, what do you got?
I just want to look at that fraud narrative because obviously it keeps coming up, looking at point differential and DVOA and all these different stats to show accurately that the Vikings aren't putting teams away. That, like, how could you continue to get this close to the wire? I think, you know, like Patrick Peterson said, we know we're living on the edge. They have to be aware of that after the Colts game, even after this result against the Giants. But I think you're a fraud team if you get to the playoffs and all year long you've said, we're building calluses, we're getting used to pressure. These games feel like playoff games. And then like Washington blows you out or something, and the Giants blow you out. I think so long as they do what they probably will do, win a close game against an inferior team. And even if one of the big three just blows them out of the water, I'm talking like, you know, drop kick, kind of looks like that Cowboys game. You can call that fraudulent. I'd say, surprise, surprise, the Minnesota Vikings in the first year of the O'Connell regime that was 500 the 2 years before can't compete with one of the top three teams in the NFC. Now, granted, I know it's a watered down NFC, but can't compete with one of those guys. I don't think that's fraudulent. I think that's just a realistic look at where that team is. I do think there's something to, they've been here before. They continue to deliver. They're more comfortable in this situation. Certainly, like the idea that you had something buried underneath these two 500 teams and a new coach could bring it out of, that has been true. And I think that debunks the straight up fraudulent narrative.
I would say
before Sam, before we get to you, A, can you hear my brother's dog just going off in the background? Okay. He's reacting, B, to what Tom is saying. No, I genuinely have a question, though. So, to me, I don't think that this is evidence that this is a fraudulent team if they get blown out by one of the top three teams in the NFC. My question is, does it seem like a fraudulent team if they lose a close game against a nominally inferior team? They hit a close game again, and they lose it. That feels like a fraudulent team, right? Again,
yes, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, fair enough. Fraudulent is defined by our expectations. If our expectations is that this is going to perform like a traditional 11 or 12 win team, I think that is fair to maybe call them fraudulent. But that does not mean to say that this is a failure at the first year of the Kevin O'Connell era. Sorry, Sam.
Oh, that's okay. I was going to jump on that too. I mean, I think winning one playoff game gets you in the same spot where every Vikings playoff team has been for 35 years. 1987. That's the last time a Vikings team won multiple playoff games.
Oh my
How'd that go?
God.
1987.
Go on.
And if you, it didn't go great. So if you get to the NFC Championship game, if you win two playoff games, you are already in rarefied Vikings air. You are not a fraud if that happens. I think if you win one playoff game and then lose massively, you might be a fraud. If you win one playoff game and lose close, I don't think you're a fraud. Like, I think it's very subjective, to use that word around any playoff team. But I think that based on fans' expectations, they want to see a competitive playoff showing, and they want to at least see this team beat the teams they're supposed to beat. My narrative was that the offensive line is like massively improved. I'm not sure it is. Pressure rate through 15 games last year, 33%. This year, it's at 37% allowed. So Kirk Cousins is getting pressured 4% more often on a team that throws it the third highest percentage in the league. Sack rate is up from 4.8 to 6.9. Anyone going to jump in with a nice there? Nope. Okay. And he's gone from 11th to 2nd in total pressures faced.
Sam, I just want to say, I trusted your what's the opposite of growth? Developing immaturity. I've trusted your developing immaturity over the years to be able to do that yourself, and I'm glad that you delivered. This is a coaching point, and you've executed well.
Maybe the most sophomoric thing that I've ever done on this show. So
sadly, might be true.
So, I'm not convinced about this offensive line, even though they have like some unbelievable pieces. Brian O'Neill and Christian Darrisaw are unbelievable. Ezra Cleveland seems improved. Garrett Bradbury is a league average center this year, and they have one guard who's bottom of the league. It still seems like the line, like even though the pieces individually are great, it doesn't feel like the overall performance has matched that. And I don't know where the flaws are necessarily showing up. I can't figure out like where all the cracks are, why this is happening, why Kirk Cousins is taking so many hits. I just think it's less of a narrative because Kirk Cousins has been a little more agile, a little better under pressure, and he always gets up after the hits. So we kind of gloss it over, but I do think it's a problem. And I think against a team like San Francisco, they could really be exposed. All right, we've got a little bit of time left. Packers week. Packers Sunday, 3:25. I think it's a national game. I assume this is a Jim Nantz game on CBS.
Yeah.
And the Packers need to win. The Packers have won 3 in a row. They obviously have to win the rest. They need some help from Washington, who plays the Browns, I believe, at home. Early Packers thoughts, gentlemen. Alec, what do you think about this Packers matchup?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really fun game, to be honest with you. I also think, if I'm not mistaken, the Packers are favored by 4 points. I think I saw that earlier this week. So that is a consistent theme of the Vikings being underdogs in a way that probably fuels some motivation. But no, I mean, I think it's going to be – I mentioned it earlier, Joe Barry's we could call it interesting decision-making in week 1 in terms of how he attempted to defend Justin Jefferson. I mentioned to see how they try to counteract that. I also think this Packers offense, in terms of what Christian Watson's been able to do of late and some of the pieces they have offensively, there seems to be a lot more trust and fluidity between their pass catchers and their quarterback in a way that I think poses some different problems to this Vikings defense. So I expect a close game that is I expect a close game. Really, really going out on a limb at this point in the Vikings season. But I expect it to be fun. I think this is a fun matchup, nice test, and yeah.
I would agree. It is a nice test, and this would again be like one of your better road wins of the year behind Buffalo. This suddenly looks like a formidable opponent who's won 3 in a row and a quarterback who's highly motivated and is going to the Hall of Fame. Arif, Packers thoughts? And again, we defer to the national writer to tell us if the Packers are actually legit in this 3-game winning streak.
I feel like you're making fun of me now. This is rough.
Well, I mean, yeah, you did defect and you left us here. You no longer sit next to us at the games because you're on your high horse back at home watching whatever Red Zone on 8 different TVs.
The Vikings won't let me bring 4 screens to the games. That's the reason why.
Shame. Chris Thomason brings a printer. You can't bring.
He brings a heater.
Okay, but are you going to say no to Chris Thomason? I think there's a difference there, right?
Arif listens to instructions. That's the difference.
Convincing man.
Yeah. No, I left so that Alec Lewis could learn to fly on his own. I think that taking the training wheels off is the best way. Obviously, it was a
grateful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, okay, so I'll say this. So the Vikings have actually only been underdogs 4 times this season. Now, one of them, obviously, the Buffalo Bills. They won that game. The other 3 games are their 3 multi-score losses. I don't know that being an underdog is all that is like, oh, the Vikings are like beating these odds. Vegas doesn't believe it. It's only happened 4 times, and 3 times Vegas was, I'm not going to say right because they got blown out, and that's not what the spread says, but Vegas was correct on the valence of the game, right? So I'll say that. But the Packers are not real. I don't think that this 3-game winning streak means much. 2 of them are against teams that don't mean very much. Like with the Rams and the Bears, they're not very good teams. They don't really mean a lot in terms of being able to pull together some wins against them. Now the Dolphins game is really interesting. The Dolphins are a very good team. Also, 3 picks. I think in that game was 3 picks from Tua Tagovailoa. One of those picks obviously was like a receiver miscommunication. Either way, none of those picks to me looked like they were like pure, skill expressions, right? They all looked like they were mistakes from the offense rather than, products of the defense. And so I just when I talk about sustainability a lot, I talk a lot about, turnovers defining games and how that's hard to repeat and stuff like that. The Packers wins are a really good example of that, more so than the Vikings wins. The Vikings over the past couple of weeks have shown me more to make me believe in them, despite these 1-score games, than the Packers have. And so to me, the Packers stringing together these wins doesn't mean very much to me. I think Aaron Rodgers is still playing, pretty poorly, whether or not that's a product of, his inability to trust. I don't know what the reason is, but, that defense isn't very good. Their capacity to produce turnovers is not going to be consistent when they go up against the Vikings versus against, a team that is willing to just throw directly to linebackers and defensive backs. I don't see this as a game where, the Packers win streak and kind of the Vikings history of close games really means anything. I think that Vegas probably has something, here, right? The Packers are probably getting 1.5 to 2 points because it's home field, but this is a game where I'm probably going to go against, that trend there and say that the Vikings are more likely than not to pull it out. I think they're just a more high quality team. They've got higher quality players at key positions if we assume that Rodgers' decline is real. And so far it looks like it is.
Interesting. Yeah, most interceptions since 2010. Not good on 3rd down. Not good in the red zone. Tom Schreier, Vikings or Packers? If you're a betting man, which side would you be on?
No, I think it's the Packers. I know that sucks to hear because there was this temptation before the Packers, as Arif said, went on this kind of weird 3-game win streak that this could come full circle, right? The Vikings held on all year long and kind of scraped by with this weird, janky, anxious team last year, and the Packers just said goodbye, right? And Cousins missed that game. It seemed like we knew the conclusion, what would happen. And I think the Rams had functionally eliminated them from the playoffs anyways the week before. It did seem like you could maybe close that circle this year and say, hey, let's, the Vikings go beat the Packers and put them out of their misery. But I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, Arif. I think you're right. Like, Rodgers is declining. I still think he has chemistry with 2 good receivers now, and he didn't have that in the beginning of the year. The Packers have a lot to play for, and if there's any tone setting they want to have, you can set the tone by winning. I don't think this is going to feel like Philadelphia or Dallas, but it could feel like Detroit, right? Detroit set that as kind of their Super Bowl. That was a very meaningful game, packed house. They talked about the standing room only in Detroit. I think this is going to feel like Lambeau Field, both in terms of temperature and their fans and their expectations. And this just feels like a setup for something disappointing because it's played there, because the Packers have something to play for, and because the Vikings, as we have been saying all year long, have been squeezing by teams. And I don't know if that formula works against the Packers in those conditions.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see how Kirk Cousins fares in a cold weather game like this. I know he's played a couple in Chicago in recent years that they've won, but they won really ugly. Like last year in Chicago, Kirk Cousins was abysmal, and Justin Fields was just a little bit worse. But the passing game had nothing going on that day, and Kirk Cousins technically got a win. He didn't really earn it himself. I want to see how he fares on a team with this high of expectations going into Green Bay, how he looks in 32 and rain and wet conditions, because it's going to be sloppy. How is he going to hold up? I think that's a pretty big storyline.
Like Buffalo.
Buffalo. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Great point, Alec. I don't know how I forget about like the greatest Vikings game of all time, but I forgot about the Vikings.
We just saw another one, man.
Alec remembers because they make you stand outside the locker room. So you like leave the press box, walk outside, and then walk outside. And I saw Alec, for some reason, you did not bring a coat and you had a shiver that I thought your soul just leapt out of your body. Like that's how Alec remembers the conditions of those games. Is that
I had a coat. It wasn't big enough. But
yes,
I will say this. I only said
we had a
like
spring
Buffalo.
coat.
He was styling,
No.
man. He looked like a Southern gentleman.
I did not want to derail Sam's point. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Kirk sailed 2 balls in that game that were picked off, and it was cold. That was the only reason I brought it up, not to be absolutely roasted for my lack of winter attire.
Wait, Missouri really is the South,
but
huh?
I'll take it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Gambling update. I know the Lukes are gone, but Arif, just for your sake here, all that matters in our contest is that I don't stage a miraculous comeback because it's the loser who gets punished, and I did not. I texted you guys late because I made a mistake last week. I did 2 over-unders, blah, 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 blah. I had to change it. I changed it to Browns against the Saints. I took the Browns spread. Terrible idea. I've been betting against Deshaun Watson the whole time. I thought, I was betting with my heart. I'm going to bet with my head. I don't like a dome team going to play in cold Cleveland, and I regretted it. So massive miss on my part. I'm still in the hole. Arif, you went 2-0? No, 1-1.
I believe I went 1-1. I mean, I'll take 2-0. Yeah, no, I went 2-0. You're right. Yeah.
No, you didn't. You lost on the line. So I've got 2 weeks left to come back, and I have to get basically every single bet correct. We end the show with our party fouls every week, the biggest faux pas of the week. Let's run the animation for that.
It's time to tell you who spilled their proverbial drink on the sofa. Get ready for this week's party foul.
I feel like Schreier is sitting on a good one. I don't know why, but I just feel like he is.
It's a really, really good one. I'm going to steal this from Alec Lewis from the elevator. I hope, Alec, you know where I'm going with this. But I jump into Kirk Cousins' press conference late. So you have to kind of make a decision when you're covering the team. Do you stay in the locker room, get quotes from the players, or do you go over and listen to whatever O'Connell says and Cousins says? So most of the players had gone, jump into the press conference with Cousins. I'm sitting in the back, and I see our buddy, intrepid reporter Chris Thompson, cruising down the seam of the press conference room, sits in the front row, which he notoriously does. And Cousins does miss him when he's not there. Cousins will admit it. He misses Chris Thompson when he's not there, shouting questions at him, even though he's like 2 feet away from him. Sits right next to Kirk Cousins' son. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen. Like Kirk Cousins' son was sitting by himself, probably proud of his dad, big game, speaking in public. This superstar player with apparently his mother's fashion, wearing his mother's fashion or whatever. He picks out her clothes, Cousins' clothes, but his son's just sitting there innocently, and you just see Chris Thompson plop down right next to him.
No, that's amazing. What? How can you follow up seeing your father do the most he can, essentially a star player right now, than to see the only brighter star in the room come up to you and sit next to you?
Good
point. Absolutely fantastic. Just what a great day for that kid.
Big time. He was in Chris Thompson's aura, like right in the aura.
Yeah.
That was great. We love Chris. My party foul for the week. It's still stuck in my craw. Jalen Naylor. He could have downed the punt at the 1 yard line. Why do punt gunners crash into the football? That's one of my big pet peeves of special teams is when that happens. He comes in like a bat out of hell. He knocks the ball in the end zone and ruins Ryan Wright's touchback streak in addition. So that's a big party foul on Jalen. Do better.
The announcers, I think, also screwed up talking about Ryan Wright because they were like, yeah, this is his best punt of the game. And it was like, no, I mean, you missed the Jalen Naylor one. He had a bunch of good punts in the game. It's just like the first one wasn't good, right? And so they've just been talking about it, like they've been struggling all game. What are you talking about, man? It was really weird. Which could be my party foul. But instead, my party foul is one that just popped up on the timeline just now. why is Condoleezza Rice like always involved in these football conversations? So it was just released that the Broncos are asking Condoleezza Rice to assist in their head coaching search. Now, I know that she has football chops. I'm not saying that it doesn't make a ton of sense. There is something there, right? Because she was on the college football, search committee. She's always been deeply committed to college football. She, I believe, was like the provost at Stanford or something like that. And she had a particular interest in football. I'm not saying that she's not qualified, right? What I'm saying is, why always her? First of all, there's a lot of qualified people. And second, we're going to get a little bit political here. Why the war crimes person? You don't have to get the war crimes person. Just get not the war crimes person to assist in your head. It's a head coach search. There's like 6 candidates, right? There's not that complicated. You don't have to look that deep. You don't need to pay Korn Ferry. You don't need to pay Condoleezza Rice. This is not determining which of the 6 teams should go to the playoff, which of the 4 out of the 6 teams should go to the playoff or anything like that, using a number of series of statistics and narratives. It's just you just got to do 6 interviews. You're fine, right? I'm not saying head coach searching is easy. I'm just saying that Korn Ferry and Condoleezza Rice are not going to make it any easier, and you're just wasting money for no reason. So that's my party foul is Condoleezza Rice is always involved in these for no reason.
For political takes, visit the Wide Left podcast featuring Arif Hasan, the Wide Left podcast.
Most of us agree it's war crimes now. That's all I'm saying.
Is that still being produced? That podcast?
No, we haven't recorded in 2 years. But yeah, check out. We might record a new episode. Who knows?
Okay. Hey, it's evergreen. It's all evergreen.
He'll bring Alec.
Politics never changes.
Yeah.
It's all the same.
Yeah.
Alec, party fouls?
I was going to bring up the Broncos and the fact that they named their interim coach as Jerry Rosburg, the guy Nathaniel Hackett brought in to be his game management guy. But really, it's just you have Ejiro Evero as your defensive coordinator. This guy who
what a top head coach
warranted. Yeah, like arguably the best head coaching candidate this cycle. He's right there. He is in your building. He is right there. He's young. He's respected. He's been around. I know he's very close with Nathaniel Hackett, but this guy's going to be a head coach. And I just don't understand why you go with the game management guy that you brought in during the middle of the season. Ejiro Evero deserves
Sean Payton.
He deserves.
Sean Payton's coming.
I will say this. It did sound like they may have asked him and he may have turned them down. I'm not saying that's a source report. It sounds like that might have been the case, in which case it's a little bit more reasonable but still Rosburg joined in week 2, right? If I'm remembering that correctly, or week 3.
Right. I believe, yes, there were some Nathaniel Hackett gaffes in week 1 that said, the internet ablaze, and then they brought in.
He's oh yeah,
they did what you have to do, bring in Jerry Rosburg. Anyway, no, I do think there is something. Maybe Ejiro Evero didn't want it. Maybe thrusting him into that situation where you lose a couple more games looks bad. There's a lot of there's a lot of elements to it. This guy deserves to be a head coach, and so I don't know. The fact that it was Jerry Rosburg, it was this Broncos situation. It was pretty emblematic, I think.
Well, Sam said, when you reach out to Sean Payton, you can say, "Don't worry about the interim. You just don't worry about it."
Yeah. Lame duck. So Arif, you'll be back with us on Thursday as we really dig into this Packers preview. We'll see what comes out of the Vikings facility the next couple of days. And make sure to comment on the YouTube video, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available. Locked On Sports Minnesota. For Tom, Alec, Reef, I'm Sam Ekstrom saying so long on the Minnesota Football Party.